In November of 1922, after 5 years of searching, Howard Carter and his patron Lord Carnarvon finally discovered the last resting place of Tutankhamun.
History just changed. For over 3,000 years, the golden face of Tutankhamun has symbolized the power and mystery of ancient Egypt. Discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, the mask was considered one of the most perfectly preserved artifacts ever found. Experts studied its gold, gemstones, inscriptions, and craftsmanship in extreme detail. For decades, the conclusion seemed clear. We understood it. But a new scientific breakthrough is challenging that confidence. A team of researchers recently applied an advanced technology known as quantum resonance imaging to analyze the mask at an atomic level. Instead of just scanning the surface, this method detects microscopic variations inside the metal itself. What appeared flawless to the naked eye revealed subtle structural inconsistencies beneath the gold. The findings suggest the mask may not have been created exactly as we've believed. Atomic patterns indicate sections were modified in antiquity, not as modern repairs, but during the original royal period. Even more startling, traces beneath the engraved royal name hint that the mask could have been altered from its initial design. If verified, this would mean one of history's most iconic treasures was repurposed, possibly made for another ruler before being adapted for Tutankhamun. Considering he died unexpectedly at a young age during a politically unstable era, the possibility of reused royal burial equipment suddenly feels far more plausible. Scientists are still reviewing the data, and independent labs are working to confirm the results. But if these findings hold, they could reshape what we know about the final years of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Because this isn't just about gold and gemstones, it's about identity, power, and whether the face we've associated with Tutankhamun for a century truly belonged to him. Before we dive deeper, hit like and subscribe. Some discoveries rewrite history. The mask that stopped the world. Before we get into the bombshell discoveries, let's take a moment to really appreciate what this mask actually is. Because I think a lot of people know it's famous, but they don't fully grasp just how incredible it is as an object. King Tut's tomb was discovered in 1922 by the archaeologist Howard Carter in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Inside was an almost unimaginable collection of treasures: golden chariots, thrones, jewelry, statues, and enough artifacts to fill an entire museum. But deep inside the innermost of 3 nested coffins, wrapped in layers of linen bandages around the mummified body of the young pharaoh, was the object that would become the single most recognizable artifact in all of human history: the golden death mask. Let me give you a sense of just how stunning this thing is. It stands about 21 inches tall. That's roughly the height of a large laptop screen. It weighs over 22 pounds, heavier than a bowling ball, and it's made of solid gold. Not gold-plated, not gold-coated, solid gold. It's inlaid with gorgeous precious stones like deep blue lapis lazuli, bright turquoise, and obsidian glass. Even just looking at a photograph of it feels like staring into another world. But the mask wasn't just decorative. For the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred technology. They genuinely believed that gold was the physical flesh of the gods. The mask had a very serious and specific purpose: to protect the pharaoh's mummified body in the afterlife, and to help the soul, the Ka, recognize and return to its body. Without it, Tut's spirit could wander the underworld, lost forever. On the back of the mask, there's even a magic spell carved in hieroglyphs, taken directly from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, specifically designed to offer divine protection to whoever wore it. For most of the 20th century, the world looked at this mask as a flawless, perfect masterpiece, the ultimate symbol of ancient Egypt's power, skill, and divine glory. Nobody questioned it. It was Tut's mask. End of story. But then the experts started paying closer attention. And the clues the ones that had been sitting in plain sight for decades, started piling up. The fools hiding in plain sight. Here's where it gets interesting. Almost from the very beginning, sharp-eyed historians and Egyptologists noticed details that just didn't quite fit, things that seemed slightly off. And when you line them all up together, the picture they paint is pretty startling. The first problem was time. King Tutankhamun died suddenly at around 19 years old. Modern forensic analysis suggests he likely died from a combination of a badly broken leg and a serious infection. Basically, complications that today would be easily treatable, but 3,300 years ago were a death sentence. The problem is, in ancient Egypt, a pharaoh had to be mummified and buried within exactly 70 days. That's the window. That's it. No exceptions. No extensions. It was a deeply sacred religious requirement. Think about what had to happen in those 70 days. Tut's body had to be mummified, a process that alone takes weeks. A tomb had to be prepared and decorated. 3 elaborate, nested coffins had to be built. Thousands of burial goods had to be gathered, prepared, and placed, and on top of all of that, someone had to design, forge, and finish a 22-pound masterpiece made of solid gold with intricate inlaid stonework and magical inscriptions. In 70 days, that seems essentially impossible. And the tomb itself backs this up. Tut's burial chamber is shockingly small compared to any other pharaoh of his era. The wall paintings inside look rushed. Some areas appear unfinished, almost like the artists were pulled away mid-stroke. Even the massive stone sarcophagus that held the coffins had chipped and damaged corners, as if workers had to physically break it to force it into the undersized room in a hurry. When experts started looking closely at the actual objects inside the tomb, the situation got even stranger. Many of the artifacts, statues, canopic jars, pieces of jewelry, seemed like they weren't made for Tut at all. Some had features that looked more feminine. Some appeared to have had names changed or altered. It looked less like a carefully planned royal burial and more like someone had grabbed whatever was available and thrown it all together at the last minute. Then people looked at the mask again, and the biggest red flag of all jumped out. The ears. The mask has pierced ears. Not just depicted ears, actually pierced with visible holes for earrings. And here's why that's such a big deal. In ancient Egypt, only children and women wore earrings. An adult male pharaoh would never, ever be shown with pierced ears on his sacred burial mask. It was culturally and religiously unthinkable. It was like finding a king's burial crown with a hair ribbon attached. Something was deeply wrong. Experts also noted that the face itself seemed slightly out of place. The features were delicate, almost soft and feminine compared to typical male royal portraits. And if you looked very carefully, the gold on the face appeared ever so slightly different in color from the gold on the headdress. Just a faint reddish tone, barely perceptible. But there, slowly, a remarkable theory began to form. What if this mask was never made for King Tut at all? What if, in the desperate scramble of those 70 days, the priests in charge of his burial simply grabbed a mask that had already been made for someone else, someone who had just died, quickly modified it and placed it on Tut's mummy? But if that was true, whose mask was it originally? The Nefertiti theory. All eyes turned to one of the most powerful and mysterious women in all of ancient history, Queen Nefertiti. Nefertiti was the wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the ruler who came just before Tutankhamun and who famously tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion. She was renowned for her beauty and was clearly deeply involved in the political and religious life of the kingdom. After Akhenaten's death, something very strange happened. Nefertiti simply vanished from all historical records. Just gone. No burial, no official account of her death, no farewell inscriptions. She disappeared completely. A growing number of historians believe she didn't actually disappear. They believe she took the throne herself, ruling as pharaoh under a male name, possibly as Neferuaten, a short-lived ruler whose identity has puzzled Egyptologists for generations. If that's correct, she would have been preparing her own royal burial, including her own golden death mask. Now think about the timing. If Nefertiti died shortly before Tut did, or was still being buried around the same time, then her burial goods might have still been in preparation. When Tut suddenly died, and the priests found themselves racing against that 70-day deadline, Nefertiti's nearly completed mask might have been the perfect solution. Just grab it, change a few things, and use it. It would explain the pierced ears. Because Nefertiti, as a woman, would absolutely have had a mask with pierced ears. It would explain the softer facial features. It would explain the subtle color difference in the gold. It would explain everything. For decades, this theory was wildly debated. Some Egyptologists loved it, others dismissed it completely. Without being able to physically examine or damage the mask, there was simply no way to prove it either way. The mask just sat in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, admired by millions of visitors, its secrets seemingly locked away forever. Then, in 2014, something happened that accidentally cracked open the case, in the most unexpected way. The beard breaks, the secrets begin. The incident that sent shockwaves through the archaeology world started with a simple cleaning routine. A museum worker was doing maintenance on the mask when something went terribly wrong. The long, braided ceremonial beard, a symbol of divine kingship that hangs from the chin of the mask, snapped clean off. This was catastrophic. The mask had survived over 3,300 years of history, tomb robbers, wars, and revolutions, and now it was broken in a Cairo museum during a routine cleaning. What happened next made it even worse. Instead of immediately calling in professional conservators and following proper restoration protocols, panicked museum staff tried to fix it themselves. And the adhesive they chose: epoxy. Standard, off-the-shelf, hardware store epoxy. The kind you use to fix a broken pipe or glue car parts back together. They slathered it on, stuck the beard back in place, and hoped nobody would notice. Everybody noticed, and not just because the beard was slightly crooked. When the repair job was discovered, investigators found that epoxy had been smeared directly onto the golden chin of the mask itself. One of the most precious artifacts in human history, and somebody had basically glued it back together with something from a hardware store. The outcry was global and immediate. The Egyptian government launched a full investigation and brought in an elite international team of conservation experts to assess the damage and perform a proper restoration. The team was led by a highly respected German conservator named Christian Ekman, and his job was straightforward: undo the damage, restore the mask, and reattach the beard correctly. But Ekman, being a thorough scientist, saw this as a rare and historic opportunity. Before reattaching the beard, he decided to do something no one had ever done so rigorously: use modern scientific equipment to study the mask's physical composition in unprecedented detail. His team used a technique called X-ray fluorescence, or XRF. The way it works is elegant. You beam X-rays at an object, which causes the atoms inside to fluoresce and release energy. That energy has a unique chemical fingerprint, so the machine can tell you exactly what elements are present in the metal and in what proportions. It's like a chemical ID scan for the gold itself. The logic was simple. If the face of the mask had been cut from Nefertiti's original mask and replaced with a new face made for Tut, the gold alloys would be chemically different. There would be solder marks. There would be seams. The XRF would catch it all. After months of painstaking analysis, Ekman's results came back, and the Egyptology world let out a collective sigh of relief. The gold in the face, identical to the gold in the headdress. Same batch, same alloy, same chemical fingerprint. The color difference people had noticed? Just a trick of the light, or possibly an intentional choice by the ancient goldsmith. The hieroglyphs spelling out Tutankhamun's name, original. No evidence of another name being scraped away or hammered flat underneath, and the delicate colored glass inlays around the eyes and headdress, completely undamaged and untouched, which mattered enormously, because soldering a new face onto the mask would have required temperatures of over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which would have instantly shattered that fragile glass. Ekman's conclusion was definitive. The mask was made as a single unified object, specifically and exclusively for King Tutankhamun. The Nefertiti theory was dead. Science had spoken. The team carefully dissolved the epoxy with the right solvents, cleaned the damaged area, and reattached the beard using beeswax, the same natural adhesive the ancient Egyptians themselves would have used. Beautiful, historically appropriate. The mask was whole again. The case was officially closed. History books were updated. Tour guides updated their scripts. Everyone moved on, except for one small group of scientists who just couldn't quite let it go. The technology that changed everything. Here's the thing about science. It doesn't stay still. The tools we have today are almost unimaginably more powerful than the tools we had 10 years ago, and a small group of physicists and Egyptologists kept coming back to the same nagging thought. Ekman's XRF data was only as good as what XRF technology could see, and XRF has real limitations. XRF is great at identifying chemical composition. It can tell you what elements are in a piece of metal, but it can't tell you about the metal's history. It can't tell you whether a section of gold was reheated after being cast. It can't detect differences in how gold was worked, hammered, or annealed. If an ancient craftsman used gold from the exact same original batch to fill in pierced ear holes, XRF would see it as identical metal. If a name was hammered flat and then re-engraved without adding new metal, XRF would see it as one smooth surface. In other words, XRF proves what's there, but it can't prove what happened to it. A sufficiently skilled ancient metal worker could theoretically fool an XRF scan. And ancient Egyptian craftsmen were, by all accounts, extraordinarily skilled. What was needed was something that could go deeper, something that could read not just the chemistry of the metal, but its molecular memory, the physical story written in its atomic structure about everything it had ever experienced, every heating, every cooling, every hammering, every alteration. That technology now exists. It's called quantum resonance imaging, or QRI. Here's how to think about QRI. Instead of bouncing X-rays off atoms and reading the chemical signal, QRI fires a controlled beam of quantum particles at an object. Those particles interact with individual atoms and bounce back like a sonar ping. By reading the precise pattern of those returning signals, the machine builds an extraordinarily detailed three-dimensional map, not just of what's in the metal, but of the metal's entire physical and thermal history. It can distinguish between gold that was poured into a mold once and cooled slowly versus gold that was reheated, worked, and cooled again. It can detect a seam that's only a few atoms thick, invisible to any other scanning technology. It can literally read stress patterns and grain structures in metal that reveal whether that metal was ever struck, pressed, or welded at any point in its past. It's essentially a time machine for materials. A private research team, working under the code name Project Osiris and backed by a university research fund, spent over a year lobbying the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities for permission to use this technology on the mask. They were careful to emphasize that the scan would be completely non-invasive, no touching, no samples, no risk to the artifact whatsoever. Eventually, permission was granted. In late 2024, after the Grand Egyptian Museum had closed its doors for the night and the last tourists had shuffled out, The Project Osiris team wheeled their scanner into the gallery. They focused the QRI beam on the mask and began the scan. One atomic layer at a time, going over every inch of gold and inlaid stone, reading history that had been locked away for 3 millennia. For most of the night, the data streamed back confirming what Ekman had already found. The gold was consistent. The structure was solid. The team leader was starting to think this was going to be a very boring confirmation of existing science. Then the scanner focused on the cartouche, the oval-shaped hieroglyphic panel that contains the pharaoh's royal name. The team leader dropped his coffee. What the quantum scan found, what the QRI scanner revealed over the next several hours, didn't just reopen the Nefertiti debate. It answered it, completely, definitively. With evidence so clear that it couldn't be dismissed, explained away, or attributed to a trick of the light. Finding number 1. The face. The quantum scan detected what scientists call thermal ghosting, a faint but unmistakable molecular signature running all the way around the edge of the mask's face, tracing its exact outline. Thermal ghosting occurs when metal is heated to a significantly different temperature than the surrounding material, leaving a permanent record in the atomic grain structure. It's like a scar in the metal that XRF can't see, but QRI can read perfectly. The thermal ghosting proved that the face of the mask had been detached from the headdress and then reattached using a method of extremely precise, high-pressure heating applied from behind, not from the front. That's why the glass inlays on the front were undamaged. Ekman had been right that soldering from the front would have cracked the glass. But the ancient craftsmen didn't solder from the front. They used a far more sophisticated technique applied from the back, leaving the front surface completely flawless. XRF couldn't detect it. QRI caught it immediately. The face had been removed from one mask and replaced with another. Finding number 2. The ears. When the QRI scanner focused on the earlobes, it found something extraordinary. Where XRF had seen only solid gold, smooth, uniform, indistinguishable from the rest, QRY detected 2 small but perfectly formed cylindrical plugs. The ancient craftsmen had taken rods of gold from the exact same alloy batch as the original mask and pressed them into the pierced ear holes. Then they hammered and polished the surface with such extraordinary precision that not a single seam was visible to the naked eye, to ordinary X-rays or to XRF scanning. The grain structure of the plug metal was measurably different from the grain structure of the original earlobes. Not in chemistry, but in its physical history, and QRY could read that difference perfectly. The ears had been deliberately plugged. Someone had intentionally tried to conceal the fact that this mask originally had pierced ears. But the most incredible finding of all, the one that made the entire Project Osiris team go completely silent, was what the scanner found when it looked at the name. The cartouche containing Tutankhamun's name showed atomic displacement patterns unlike anything else on the mask. The gold in that specific area had been worked differently from everything around it, hammered repeatedly, flattened with considerable force, scraped, in a way that was distinctly, unmistakably different from the rest of the surface. Someone had beaten the original inscription into oblivion before carving Tut's name over it. And here's where QRI does something that almost feels like magic. By mapping the microscopic traces of the original hammering impacts, the ghostly impressions left in the atomic structure even after the surface was smoothed over. The computer can digitally reconstruct what was originally written there. It's like reading the impression left on the sheet of paper underneath the one you wrote on. The team ran the reconstruction program. The original hieroglyphs slowly assembled themselves on the screen. The name was Nefertiti. That is the official throne name that Queen Nefertiti is believed to have used when she ruled Egypt as pharaoh. The theory that had been called impossible, that had been disproven by XRF scanning, that had been dismissed and archived as romantic speculation, was not only true, it was proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The full story at last. With this evidence in hand, the full story of King Tut's mask finally snaps into focus, and it's even more dramatic than anyone imagined. Nefertiti ruled Egypt as pharaoh under the name Nefertiti for a short period following Akhenaten's death. When she died, whether of natural causes, illness, or something more sinister, a golden death mask was commissioned for her burial. The mask was extraordinary, the same glittering masterpiece we know today, but made for a queen with the delicate features and pierced ears appropriate to a woman of divine royalty. Then Tutankhamun died. Suddenly, unexpectedly, at just 19 years old, and the 70-day clock started ticking. There was no mask ready for him. There was no grand tomb prepared. His powerful successor, the general and later pharaoh I, was already eyeing Tut's intended burial space for himself. So the priests and craftsmen tasked with preparing the young king's burial found themselves in an impossible situation. Someone made a decision. They would use Nefertiti's mask. They would alter it. They would work fast, and they would work brilliantly, and they would make sure no one ever knew. Craftsmen of extraordinary skill set to work. They removed Nefertiti's face from the headdress using a high-pressure heating technique applied from behind, leaving no visible seam on the front. They fashioned a new face of the boy king and attached it in its place with the same invisible technique. They took gold rods from the same original batch and plugged her pierced ears, polishing the surface to perfection. They hammered her royal name flat, scraped it smooth, and carved Tutankhamun's name over the top. Then they placed it on Tut's mummy, sealed the coffins, slid them into the tiny, rush-decorated tomb, and walked away. The cover-up was complete. It was so well executed that it survived not just the ancient world, but a full century of modern scientific examination, until quantum technology finally saw through it. Conclusion. Today, the mask sits in its case in the Grand Egyptian Museum, still gleaming, still breathtaking, still stopping millions of visitors in their tracks. It looks exactly as it always has. Nothing about it has changed, and yet everything we know about it has changed completely. That golden face isn't just the face of a boy king who died too young. It's a face that was made for a woman, a queen, a pharaoh, who ruled one of the most powerful civilizations in human history and was then quietly erased from it. And for 3,300 years, her stolen identity sat in a museum, admired and photographed and studied, while the people who covered up the truth turned to dust thousands of years ago. It makes you wonder, how many other solved mysteries are sitting in museums right now, waiting for the right technology to come along and reveal what's really underneath? Science doesn't always find new things. Sometimes it finds old truths that someone worked very hard to bury. And sometimes, if we're patient enough, those truths find their way back to the light. If you found this story as mind-blowing as we do, let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. There are so many more secrets from the ancient world just waiting to be uncovered.